The air inside the chamber was always cool and carried a faint hum, a sound so old it felt woven into the metal of the ship itself. Ji-ho stood in the center of the vast, circular room, his boots silent on the dark floor. All around him, from the curved walls to the high ceiling, glowed lines of soft blue light. They were not just lights. They were memories. The final words, the last pictures, the screams and the songs of a world he would never see. This was the Earthborn, the heart of the Ark ship Zheng-ji. Its name meant resolve. Ji-ho's job was simple. He tended to the ghosts. He was an archivist, like his mother and her father before her, for more generations than the blue lines could easily count. 60,000 years of caretakers. He walked to a console, a smooth black surface. He touched it. A soft chime echoed. "Custodian," Ji-ho said, his voice quiet in the big space. A presence filled the room, not a shape, but a feeling of calm attention. "I am here, Archivist Ji-ho," replied a gentle voice. It came from everywhere and nowhere. Custodian was the ship's mind, a whisper from the past that guided them through the dark. "Today's remembrance cycle," Ji-ho said. The blue lines on one section of the wall brightened. Images flickered, silent and grim. A beautiful blue planet, white clouds swirling. Then, sudden beams of terrible light, falling like rain from a black sky. The planet's surface flashed, then darkened into a blotchy gray. The images were clean, sharp. They were not from cameras on the ground. They were recordings from the few ships that escaped, looking back at the murder of their home. Earth, Terra, Lost. Next came the sounds. A jumble of voices, frantics, speaking in old languages. Korean, English, Mandarin, Spanish, hundreds more. All saying the same things in panic. "We are under attack. They are everywhere. The sky is burning." Then, the last clear broadcast, a woman's voice, steady but filled with a bottomless sadness. "To any who hear this, they are called the Calder. Remember us." The broadcast ended. The word hung in the cool air. Calder. Ji-ho did not feel anger as he watched. He felt the heavy, cold weight. A duty. The Calder were a species of living crystal. They saw the messy, changing, unpredictable life of Earth as a sickness, a chaos that threatened their perfect, orderly galaxy. So they cleaned it, they sterilized it. They thought they had wiped humanity from existence. They were wrong. A handful of ships had fled. Sleeper ships, arcs, desperate jumps into the unknown. Most were lost. The Zheng-ji was the last. For 600 centuries, it had traveled. Generations were born, lived, and died within its metal halls. All with one purpose passed from parent to child. Remember. Survive and one day return. The navigation data is confirmed. "Archivist," Custodian said. The main viewer at the front of the chamber shimmered to life. It showed the endless black of space, speckled with stars. One star was highlighted by a soft, pulsing ring. "We approach the Zarathustra system. Calder records indicate a fringe mining outpost. It is the nearest." Ji-ho nodded. This was the moment. The moment every archivist before him had dreamed of and dreaded. The end of the long silence. His hands were steady, but his heart was a drum in his chest. He left the earthborn chamber and walked through the quiet corridors of the ship. The Zheng-ji was huge, a city flying through the void, but its population was small. Everyone he passed had the same solemn look. They were all keepers of the promise. He entered the command bridge. It was not a room of flashing lights and noise. It was calm, organized. Commander Hai-jin stood before the main viewer. She was not old, but her eyes held the weight of all the years. She looked at Ji-ho as he entered. "It is time?" she asked. "Yes, Commander," Ji-ho said. Custodian has the coordinates. The Earthborn remembrance cycle is complete. Hai-Jin turned to the crew. Su-Min, the tactical officer, sat at her station, her fingers resting lightly on the controls. Bei-Hyen, the chief engineer, watched his screens, monitoring the ancient power cores that had run for millennia. Others waited, silent. "Bring us to the edge of the system," Hai-Jin ordered. Her voice was quiet but clear. "Passive sensors only. Let us look at our enemy's work." The Zhengzhi moved. There was no loud roar. A deep vibration ran through the deck as the ship's massive engines, older than history, pushed it forward. On the screen, the star grew from a point of light to a small sun. A planet came into view. It was wrong. That was Ji-Ho's first thought. It was a planet, but it looked carved. Its continents were sharp, geometric shapes. Its oceans were a perfect, uniform blue. There were no messy clouds, no random mountain ranges. A Calder mining world. They had taken a living planet and made it orderly, useful, dead in a different way. And there, in orbit, were the Calder ships. They were beautiful, in a cold way. They looked like shards of glass or ice, catching the starlight. They moved with smooth, silent grace. "They have detected us," Su-Min reported. "A scanning beam. Very low power. They are curious." On screen, a communication request appeared. It was not a standard hail. It was a simple data packet, a demand for identification in the cold. Mathematical language of the hegemony. Hai-Jin looked at it. She did not answer it. Instead, she nodded to Ji-Ho. "Archivist. The first voice they hear from humanity in 60,000 years should not be mine. It should be hers." Ji-Ho understood. He sent a command from his station. He opened the ship's broadest communication channel, aimed at the planet and the Calder ships. What he sent was not a message of peace. It was not a declaration of war. It was a memory got first. The final distress call played. The chaotic mix of panicked voices, the woman's last words. "They are called the Calder. Remember us." The transmission ended. For a moment, there was only empty static. Then, Ji-Ho leaned forward. He had practiced this one word, this single concept from the old tongue, his whole life. He made his voice flat, clear, and heavy as stone. He spoke into the silence. Human. It meant the end. It meant it is finished. On the viewer, the graceful Calder ships seemed to hesitate. Their smooth movements stuttered. Then, as one they turned. Their beautiful, crystalline forms began to glow from within with a harsh, angry light. Weapons ports opened on their flawless surfaces. The Zhengzhi, a relic from a forgotten age, hung in the dark. It did not look like much to them. It was blocky, armored, made of simple metal. It had no elegant shapes. It was a tombstone, and it had just written its first epitaph. Hai-Jin watched the enemy ships power up their weapons. She did not smile. She did not frown. Her face was a mask of calm resolution. "Shields," she said, and Su-Min's hands moved. "All stations, this is not a test. Remember Earth." The long silence was over. The time for remembering was done. Now, the ghosts would speak with fire. Su-Min watched the enemy ships on her screen. The data scrolled beside them. She saw the power building and their crystalline structures. They were going to fire. It was a simple, clean decision for them. A strange, ugly ship appears. You erase it. That was the Calder way. "Energy spike," she said, her voice calm. "They are charging primary beams." On the main viewer, Commander Hai-Jin stood with her hands behind her back. "Hold position," she ordered. "Let them." Su-Min's fingers hovered over her controls. She trusted her commander. She trusted the ship. But a cold knot sat in her stomach. This was the first real test in 60,000 years. Down on the planet, a Calder overseer watched too. His name was Taeyong, a designation given for interacting with simpler species. He stood in a transparent tower that rose from the geometric landscape. Below, machines cut perfect blocks of mineral from the ground. The air was clean, filtered, silent. The ugly ship in the sky was a stain on this perfect order. He felt a flicker of irritation. He sent the command to fire. Purge the imperfection. In space, the Calder ships unleashed their weapons. Beams of pure, coherent energy lanced out. They were the color of pale ice. They were designed to shatter molecular bonds, to turn complex, messy things like rock and flesh into inert dust. The beams hit the Zhengji's shields. There was no explosion, no fiery burst. The space around the human ship shimmered like hot air over a desert. The pale beams struck the shimmering field and bent. They scattered, their energy dissolving into harmless light. The Zhengji did not move. Taeyong, in his tower, felt his first true emotion in a long time: confusion. The scan said the ship was primitive. Its power signature was crude, based on violent fusion. It should have vaporized. On the bridge, Daehyun, the engineer, watched his own screens and allowed himself a small, tight smile. The Calder loved energy weapons. They were elegant. Humanity, in its long exile, had learned a different lesson. They had learned about walls, about stubbornness. Their shields weren't just energy barriers. They were complex webs of gravity and magnetic force, designed to grab incoming energy and twist it, spread it out, swallow it. It was not elegant. It was immensely strong. Shields at 97%, Su Min reported, the knot in her stomach loosening. Minimal drain. Hai Jin nodded. Now we answer. Su Min's hands moved. She did not target the ships first. She targeted the planet. Not the mining zones, but the main distribution hub, a towering crystalline structure that collected the mined resources. It was a symbol of order. The Zhengji did not have energy beams. Its main weapons were massive launch tubes. They fired with a deep physical thump that vibrated through the entire ship. A projectile, a dark shape the size of a ground vehicle, shot towards the planet. Taeyong saw it coming. It was slow, ungraceful. He ordered point defense lasers to target it. The lasers hit the projectile, but they did not explode it. They could not even scratch its dark, non-reflective surface. It was just a chunk of metal and something else. It slammed into the base of the distribution hub. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the air above the impact point twisted. It was a wrong thing to see. The light bent. The perfect crystal of the tower began to stretch, like taffy, towards a single, tiny point. Then, with a terrible, silent shudder, it collapsed in on itself. A sphere of perfect blackness, the size of a house, appeared for a brief moment. It swallowed the entire lower section of the tower. Then it winked out. What was left was not shattered crystal. It was a mess. A jagged, chaotic crater of melted and twisted material. The upper part of the tower fell sideways, crashing into another perfect structure in a shower of ugly, broken pieces. A singularity hammer. The humans had learned to make tiny, hungry holes in reality. They didn't destroy with heat or light. They destroyed with a fundamental force of the universe, gravity itself. Panic, a chaotic and messy emotion, erupted in the Calder communication channels. Their perfect formation broke. The ships moved, not with smooth grace, but with jerky, urgent turns. Su Min targeted them next. Smaller projectiles, but the same principle. One Calder ship tried to dodge. The projectile shot past it, but at a preset distance, it activated. A micro-singularity bloomed in space beside the ship. The beautiful crystal hull didn't crack. It was pulled, stretched, and ripped into long, spiraling strands of debris before the Singularity vanished. It was not a fight. It was a demonstration. In 10 minutes, the Calder forces were gone. 2 ships had fled. The rest were drifting, grotesque ruins. The Zhengji moved towards the planet. It landed, not at the main facility, but on the edge of the mining zone. The ground shook under its weight. Ramps extended. Su-Min led the first security team down. She wore a simple, gray armored suit. The air outside was thin and tasted of chemicals. The ground was smooth, processed rock. They moved towards a large, low building. Sensor scans showed life signs inside. Many of them. They blasted the door, not with energy, but with a shaped charge. A simple boom, a cloud of dust. Inside, they found the workers. They were not Calder. They were bipedal, but shorter, with soft skin and fearful eyes. Their clothes were rough. They were huddled together in a barren space. They looked at the humans in their strange armor, at the weapons that were not shiny, and they trembled. One of them, bolder than the rest, stepped forward. It made a series of clicks and whistles. Su-Min's suit translator processed it. A name for their species. A plea. Do not break us. We will work. Her heart ached. These were the slaves. The biological chaos the Calder had not erased, but found useful to control. She reached up and removed her helmet. The air was cold on her face. She showed them her human face, her dark hair, her eyes. She wanted them to see she was flesh, like them. Messy. Alive. The slaves stared. Confused. Su-Min spoke, and her translator spoke with her. We are from Terra, she said. The old word. The true word. We are the ones who remember. She saw no recognition in their eyes. Of course not. 60,000 years was a long time. But she said the next part slowly, clearly. The Calder are not your masters today. We are breaking their chains. The bold slave stared at her. It looked at the broken doorway, at the sky where the Calder ships were gone. A new emotion flickered in its eyes. It was not hope, not yet. It was the simple, terrifying realization that a wall it had known its entire life was gone. Su-Min turned to her team. Search the facility. Find their data cores. Everything. And find their food, their water. Help them. As her team moved, she looked back at the slaves. They were still huddled, but they were watching now. Not just with fear, but with a desperate, dawning curiosity. The Calder had imposed silence and order. The humans, with their booming weapons and their mess of a ship, had brought noise and chaos. And in that chaos, for the first time in this place, something like freedom began to stir. The silence on the bridge was different now. It was not the quiet of waiting. It was the heavy, hollow quiet of a tomb. The main viewer showed a planet. It should have been blue, white, and green. A marble of life. It was gray. It was a dead, ashen ball. The oceans were flat and dark, like tarnished metal. The continents were outlines of black and gray under a thin, toxic haze. No lights sparkled on the night side. No clouds moved. Earth was not a ruin. Ruins suggested something was left. This was a corpse, picked clean and left to bleach in the cold sunlight. Commander Hai-Jin did not speak for a long time. No one did. They had all seen the recordings 1,000 times in the Earthborn. But seeing it was different. The scale of the nothingness was a physical weight. Ji-Ho felt his breath catch in his throat. This was home. This was the cradle he had heard about in stories, sung about in old lullabies. It was a grave. He looked at Hai-Jin. Her face was a stone mask, but her eyes were red-rimmed. She finally took a slow breath. "Take us into orbit, Aion." Slow and respectful. The Zhengzhi moved, its engines a low hum of mourning. They passed the moon. It was pockmarked and silent. They saw the debris field, a ring of shattered metal and stone circling the planet like a funeral band. Pieces of old satellites, stations, ships, all dead for 60,000 years. "We are being scanned," Su Min said softly, as if speaking too loud would disturb the dead. "Old automated defense platforms. They are dead too. No power. All stations," Haijin said, her voice surprisingly steady. "This is Commander Haijin. We have returned. What we do now, we do for every soul lost here. Archivist Jiho, you are ready?" Jiho, at his console, nodded. He had been preparing for this his whole life. "The reverence protocol is ready, Commander. Begin." Jiho touched his screen. From the belly of the Zhengzhi, bays opened. Not weapon bays. They released thousands of small, sleek probes. They looked like silver seeds. They shot away from the ship, streaking down towards the gray planet below Dot. These were not builders. They were etchers. Carvers of memory. The first wave hit the atmosphere, spreading out across the globe. One probe descended over what the maps said was once called Asia. It used its lasers, not to cut, but to heat. It began to write, slowly, carefully, into the bedrock of a vast, ashen plain. The letters were kilometers tall, carved deep so they would last for eons. They spelled names. Not individual names, there were too many, but the names of the lost. Cities, Seoul, Beijing, Mumbai, Tokyo, hundreds of them. The probe moved with slow, terrible patience, inscribing the epitaph of a continent. Another probe did the same over the land that was once Europe. Another over Africa, the Americas. They wrote in every script from the archives. Hangul, Hanzi, Cyrillic, Latin, Arabic, Devanagari. The planet was being tattooed with the ghosts of its children. Meanwhile, another type of probe moved to the moon. They landed on the dark, silent surface. They unfolded and began their work. These lasers were more precise. They did not carve large letters. They etched tiny lines over and over, covering vast plains of lunar dust. From orbit, as the work progressed, an image began to form on the face of the moon. It was the face of the Earth as it was. Blue oceans, green lands, white clouds. It was a perfect, beautiful portrait on a gray canvas. A memory of life, staring forever at the dead world it once was. On the bridge, they watched the work in silence. Haijin ordered the ship to move in a slow orbit. They watched the probes carve the name Sahara over a sea of gray dust. They watched them write Amazon over a blackened scar. Jiho felt tears streaming down his face. He did not wipe them away. This was why they had come. Not just for revenge. For this. To say, we were here. We lived, and we loved this place, and you took it. For days, the work continued. The Zhengzhi was a silent witness. The crew ate little. They slept less. They watched their monitors, seeing their home become a monument to itself. Finally, the last probe finished its work and returned to the ship. The task was done. Earth, from pole to pole, was now marked with the story of its end. The moon was its eternal portrait. Haijin stood before the viewer, looking at the marked planet below. "Play it," she said. Her voice rough. Jiho knew what she meant. He opened a channel. Not a broadcast. A simple speaker on the bridge. He played the last message from Earth. The frantic voices. The final steady woman. They are called the Calder. Remember us. The message ended. The silent bridge felt emptier than before. Then Su-Min's console chimed, a sharp, urgent sound that cut through the morning. Commander. Massive void jump signatures. Dozens of them. At the edge of the system. On the viewer, space itself seemed to tear. One by one, ships slid into reality. They were not the fringe world vessels they had faced before. These were huge. They were warships of the Calder hegemony, the main fleet. Their crystalline forms were larger, more complex, glowing with a cold, proud light. They had come to see the strange threat, and they had found it here, at the source. They formed a vast, beautiful, and terrifying armada between the Zhengzhi and the sun. A communication request flashed. It was not a simple scan. It was a direct, high-priority hail from the Calder flagship. A demand.high-Jin looked at it. She looked at the gray, carved world below. She looked at the perfect, hateful fleet on her screen. The grief in her eyes hardened. It turned into something cold and sharp. She nodded. Open the channel. Visual. The screen changed. A Calder appeared. It was not like the slaves. It was taller, its crystalline body more refined, its inner light a steady, arrogant blue. It did not speak. It communicated through a direct audio signal, a voice that was like breaking ice. Organic vessel. You defile a site of hegemony victory. You will power down. You will be dismantled. Your chaotic biology will be erased. This is order. Hai-Jin stared at the creature. She did not raise her voice. She spoke as if stating a simple, undeniable fact. She gestured to the viewer behind her, which still showed the scarred face of Earth. You turned our world into a grave, she said, each word a chip of stone. You thought that was the end of the story. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked on the Calder. You were wrong. You did not kill us. You made us into this. She pointed a finger at her own ship, at her own crew. We are the memory of Earth, and now we are the instrument of its will. She took a breath, her voice dropping to a final, quiet promise that was more terrifying than a scream. Look upon your work, Calder. Now we will do the same to your entire hegemony. She cut the channel without waiting for a reply. The screen returned to the view of the flawless enemy fleet. Hai-Jin turned to her crew. The time for mourning was over. The time for the next promise had begun. Helm, she said, her voice now clear and hard as steel. Plot a course out of the system. Maximum burn. They have seen the grave. Now let them try to catch the ghost. The Zhengzhi shook. A deep, grinding groan echoed through its old bones. On the main viewer, the Calder flagship fired again. A beam of searing white energy glanced off their shields, making the whole ship lurch sideways. Shields at 62%. Su-Min called out, her hands flying over her console. They're learning. They're focusing their fire on the same sector. Commander Hai-Jin gripped the command rail. The sight of Earth had made them reckless. Now, the full might of the Calder fleet was on them. The Zhengzhi was powerful, but alone it was not invincible. It was a fortress, not a fleet. Evasive pattern Delta. Hai-Jin ordered. Dai-Hyan, we need more from the engines. In the engineering bay, deep in the ship's belly, Dai-Hyan was already drenched in sweat. His screens showed a maze of angry red lines. The ancient fusion cores were straining. They are at 110%, Commander. We cannot push them more without a core breach. They needed an escape. A miracle. Hai-Jin's mind raced through the archives. The old stories. The whispered legends from the first exiles. There was one. A desperate hope. Custodian. She shouted. The AI's calm voice filled the bridge. I am here, Commander. The Forgotten Forge, the coordinates in the Legacy Codex. Are they real? There was the briefest pause. The data is fragmented. It points to a nebula designated K7R, known as the Ghost Cloud. Probability of facility survival after 60 millennia, less than 5%. Another blast rocked the ship. A console on the bridge sparked and went dark. It is the only percent we have, Hai-Hin said. Plot the course. Maximum void jump distance. Now. The Zhengzhi turned, presenting its heavily armored rear to the Calder. It gathered power, a visible distortion growing around its engines. Then, with a shudder that made every joint in the ship cry out, it ripped a hole in space and vanished. The journey was a nightmare. The void jump was too long, too hard on the old systems. Alarms screamed constantly. They dropped back into normal space inside the ghost cloud, a vast, swirling haze of purple and blue gas. The ship was dark, running on minimal power. Several decks were open to space. They were hiding, wounded. Hai-Jin stood in the engineering bay with Daehayan. The chief engineer pointed to a massive sealed door at the very rear of the chamber. It was covered in warning symbols so old they were almost faded away. The core is behind there, Daehayan said, his voice hushed. The original builders. They did not just use fusion. He tapped a console, entering a code from the commander's own data rod. With a hiss of ancient hydraulics, the giant door began to grind open. Behind it was not a roaring engine room. It was a cavernous, silent space. In the center, held in a web of shimmering black force fields, was a tiny, perfect point of darkness. It did not glow. It sucked in a light around it. A stabilized singularity. A man-made black heart. This is our power, Daehayan said. But the forge, the stories say, was built to use this. To feed on it. To build. Hai-Jin looked at the dark point. Can you wake it? I have the activation sequence from the codex, Daehayan said. But Commander, it will be a beacon. The Calder will find us. Then we must work fast, Hai-Jin said. While Daehayan and his team worked on the forge, others worked on the new arrivals. The slaves they had freed from the mining world, they called themselves the Tova, were housed in one of the empty cargo bays. They were scared, huddled together. Ji-Ho and Su-Min were with them, showing them simple things. How to use a human water dispenser. How to open a food pack. A young Tova female, named Ella, looked at Su-Min's weapon, a solid, blocky rifle that fired metal slugs. Your tools. They are loud. They break things. Su-Min nodded. Yes, the Calder tools are quiet and clean. They make order. She picked up a twisted piece of scrap metal from the floor. Our world was messy. Beautiful, but messy. Our tools reflect that. They are stubborn. They are simple. And they work. She handed the scrap to Ella. Chaos is not weakness. It is change. It is life. The Calder fear it because they cannot control it. Ella held the twisted metal. Thinking, deep in the ship, Daehayan finished the sequence. He sent the command. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, from within the ghost cloud, a light awoke. It was a dull red pulse, like a slow heartbeat. Then another. A shape began to form, made of a nebula's dust and gas coalescing. It was a shipyard. But it was not just a place with docks. It was a single, vast machine. Arms like spider legs unfolded. Furnaces the size of cities glowed to life, fed by energy beams drawn directly from the Zhengzhi's singular heart, the forgotten. Forge was alive that it did not build elegant ships. It did not have blueprints for crystal spires. It began to build what the Zhengzhi needed, what humanity had become. The first ship that took shape was ugly. It was all angles and armor plates, with a nose like a massive battering ram. Its weapons were not beams, but giant railgun coils and missile pods. It looked brutal, simple, strong. Calder scouts. Su Min yelled from the bridge. They have found the nebula. 3 vessels entering the cloud now. The Calder scouts, sleek and fast, swept into the nebula. They saw the wounded Zhengzi. They saw the strange, ugly structure building more ugly ships. They moved to attack. Haijin watched them come. "Launch the first ship," she ordered. The newly built human vessel, with a skeleton crew from the Zhengzi, detached from the forge. Its engines fired a bright, chemical burn, not a silent glow. It was not fast. It turned slowly. The Calder scouts danced around it, firing their precise beams. The beams scorched the human ship's armor, but did not pierce it. Then the human ship fired its main weapon. The railgun shot was a solid tungsten rod moving at a fraction of light speed. It did not try to hit the agile scout. It fired it where the scout would be. The Calder pilot, used to dodging energy beams, moved right into its path. The rod hit. There was no shield interaction. The crystalline ship simply exploded into a million glittering, useless pieces. On the Zhengji's bridge, Ella the Tova watched the screen. She saw the Calder ship, a symbol of perfect, untouchable power, shattered by a simple piece of metal thrown very, very hard. She looked down at the twisted scrap in her hand. She turned to the other Tova. Her clicks and whistles were urgent. They do not just break chains. They break the idea of chains. We must help. We must learn to be loud too. The work in the forge accelerated. More ships were built. Not just human designs now. The Tova, understanding the principle's strength, simplicity, kinetic force, began to suggest modifications. Their own first ship looked like a rough stone, but it was heavy and packed with even more missiles. The Calder scout threat was gone, but they had sent a signal. The main fleet was coming. They had days, maybe hours, but they were no longer just one ship. They were a fleet. A small, ugly, brutal fleet, born from a black heart in a ghost cloud. They were no longer just the memory of Earth. They were becoming the weapon it demanded. And they were not alone. The Calder homeworld was not a planet. It was a jewel. A single, perfect, planet-sized crystal that caught the light of its sun and broke it into a billion cold, sharp rainbows. It was order made into a world, silent, flawless, forever. Hanging before it, the Calder Grand Armada was a field of lesser jewels. 1,000 ships of glittering light and clean lines, the ultimate expression of their power. They waited in perfect, silent formation. Against them, the fleet from the ghost cloud arrived, but it did not slide gracefully from the void. It ripped its way out, engines roaring with fiery defiance. There was nothing silent about them. The Zhengji, scarred and massive, led the formation. Beside and behind it were the ships of the Forgotten Forge. Blocky, angular, armored in thick, non-reflective gray metal. They looked like crude tools next to fine glass sculptures. Among them were the ships of the Tova, looking like thrown rocks, and vessels from 2 other species they had freed along their vengeful march. It was a messy, chaotic, ugly alliance. It was everything the Calder hated. On the bridge of the Zhengji, Commander Haijin watched the perfect enemy array. There were no more words, no more messages. They had all been said at the grave of Earth. This was the last page. All ships, she said, her voice carried to every vessel in the alliance. Remember why we are here. Not for their death, for the end of their reign. Target their infrastructure. Break their lattice. Follow the plan. The Calder fired first. A storm of icy light. A beautiful, coordinated ballet of destruction. The human fleet did not try to match it. They moved into a simple, brutal formation the crew called the anvil. They turned their thickest armor toward the enemy and advanced. They did not dodge. They absorbed. Shields flared and died. Armor boiled away. Ships shuddered and broke. But they kept moving forward, a wall of stubborn metal and rage. From behind this wall, the other ships acted. The Tova vessels, slow but heavy, launched their payloads. Not at the ships, but in wide arcs towards the planet itself. The missiles fell towards the crystalline surface. Before they hit, they burst apart, releasing not explosives, but billions of tiny, sharp fragments of carbon and iron-simple dust. The dust settled on the perfect crystal, scratching it, clouding its light. A small thing, a messy thing. The Calder command ship, a vast spire of light, focused its main weapon on the Zhengzhi. The beam was blinding. It cut through the last of the flagship's shields and burned a deep, molten scar along its hull. Alarms screamed. Hull breach on decks 9 through 12. Su Min yelled. Containment fields are holding. Daihan's voice came from engineering, strained. The Singularity core is stable, but we are losing secondary systems. We cannot take another hit like that. Haijin saw the Calder flagship powering up for a final shot. This was the moment. Custodian. Execute final phase. Divert all power, including life support reserves, to the gravity disruptors. Commander. Custodian's voice was calm. This will leave the Zhengzhi dead in space. Life support will fail in minutes. I know, Haijin said softly, looking at the image of the crystal world. Do it. On the planet below, the Calder High Conclave watched. They saw their perfect fleet dominating the chaotic invaders. They saw the enemy flagship dying. They felt the quiet certainty of order prevailing. Then, their sensors prickled with a strange energy reading from the crippled human ship that the Zhengzhi's remaining power. Every last joule flooded into a series of massive generators along its spine. They fired. But not a beam. It was a wave. An invisible, twisting distortion of gravity itself. It did not strike the Calder ships. It shot past them, faster than light, and struck their sun. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the star's surface rippled. A vast plume of solar plasma, far larger than any natural flare, erupted from the point of impact. It was a wave of fire, a tsunami from a sun, directed by human will. It rolled across space towards the Calder homeworld. Panic, pure and chaotic, shattered the perfect order of the Calder fleet. They broke formation. Some tried to flee. Some tried to fire at the wave, which was useless. Others turned their weapons on the Zhengzhi in a final, blind rage. The human flagship, dark and powerless, accepted the blows. It broke apart, its pieces scattering silently. But it was too late. The solar wave hit the planet. It did not explode it. It washed over it. The perfect crystal did not shatter. It melted. The geometric cities, the towering spires, the flawless plains all flowed and ran like wax under a blowtorch. The beautiful rainbows were swallowed by a single raging orange light. The wave passed. The star settled, scarred. Where the perfect jewel had been, there was now an ugly, misshapen ball of cooling, blackened crystal slag. It was still a planet, but it was no longer a Calder world. It was a tomb for their idea. The remaining Calder ships, their spirit broken, drifted. Some surrendered. Some fled into the dark, their certainty forever gone. Aboard a Tova command ship, the only vessel large enough to hold the Alliance leaders, Haijin stood with Jiho, Su Min, and Daihan. They had escaped the Zhengzhi in the last shuttle. They watched the view screen, showing the ruined world. Ella, the Tova, stood beside them. She looked at the melted planet, then at the humans. You did not kill them all. You killed. Their meaning, Jin nodded, exhausted to her soul. They thought chaos was the enemy. They thought by destroying the messy, living thing, they could win. She turned from the screen, looking at the faces of her crew, and at Ella. They were wrong. Chaos is just change. And life always changes. She walked to a console. In the center, they had placed the core memory drive from the Earthborn. It still glowed softly. Jin touched it. "Custodian," she said. A faint, ghostly version of the AI's voice filled the room, transferred at the last moment. "I am here, Commander. Add today's data to the archive. The end of the Calder hegemony. The liberation of the Tova, the Gren, the Foul, the cost. All of it. It will be done," Custodian said. The story continues. Jin looked around at her new, messy, chaotic alliance. They were miners, fighters, refugees. They were alive. "The Zhengji is gone," she said. "The vow is fulfilled. Our war is over." She took a deep breath. "Now we have to figure out what to build in the peace." Outside, the ugly, strong ships of the free species gathered around the ruined world. They were not perfect. They were not silent. But they were, finally, free. The long, cold winter of Calder order was over. A new, uncertain, and living spring had begun.